This is your fault, Aunt Iron. Tommy's dead because of you. My nephew's words cut through Arlington Cemetery's sacred silence like a blade through Kevlar. I stood in full dress blues, Legion of Merit gleaming on my chest, as Marcus whispered his accusation from 3 rows back. The metal handcuffs around his wrists caught the November sunlight like cruel jewelry, federal marshals flanking him at a soldier's funeral. The boy I'd helped raise was facing assault charges. The soldier I'd trained to be unbreakable had put a bullet through his skull at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Everyone was staring at Colonel Jennifer Iron Davis, the woman who supposedly broke boys to build killers. The honor guard's rifles cracked 3 times across the white headstones. Sergeant Tommy Chen, 23 years old, lay in that mahogany casket because of my iron method training. At least, that's what they were all thinking. That's what the whispers suggested. That's what my own family believed. Your training destroys souls, not builds them. My sister Linda's voice carried across the assembled mourners like a battle cry. Even at a military funeral, she couldn't contain her hatred. The other families shifted uncomfortably, parents of dead soldiers suddenly wondering if their sons had died because of me too. Behind me, 200 Special Forces soldiers stood in perfect formation. My graduates, my Iron Legion, men I'd psychologically conditioned to be America's deadliest protectors. But Tommy had been one of them, and now he was dead by his own hand. The questions clawed at me. Had I created something beautiful or something terrible? The chaplain droned through military prayers while I stared at that flag-draped casket. Tommy used to joke about death during training. "Colonel Davis," he'd said after his final graduation exercise, saluting with that crooked grin. "If I die saving somebody, that's a good death, right?" I should have seen the hairline cracks in his psychological armor, should have known that teaching someone to be unbreakable might shatter them in ways I never anticipated. The honor guard presented the folded flag to Mrs. Chen, Tommy's mother. She accepted it with trembling hands, then looked directly at me, not with hatred, not with blame, with something worse, disappointment. "Colonel Davis," she said quietly, her voice somehow carrying across the assembled mourners. "He talked about you constantly, said you made him strong, said you taught him how to protect people." Her voice cracked. "Why couldn't you teach him how to protect himself?" The question hit harder than any court-martial could, because I didn't have an answer. Because for all my methods, all my psychological conditioning, all my iron method success stories, I had never learned that skill myself. As the ceremony ended, soldiers filed away in perfect formation. Families gathered their grief and departed. The federal marshals began leading Marcus toward a waiting van. He stopped beside me, those handcuffs glinting in the dying light. "You want to know what I did, Aunt Iron?" His voice was eerily calm, controlled. The same tone I'd taught him to use when violence was necessary. "I put a man in the hospital, nearly killed him, used everything you taught me about finding weak spots, applying pressure." My chest tightened. Marcus, he was hurting someone who couldn't fight back, someone innocent, just like you taught me. He looked me dead in the eye. "So tell me, Colonel, did I do good?" The marshals pulled him away before I could answer. His question hung in the November air like smoke from the honor guard's rifles. As the cemetery emptied, I remained standing beside Tommy's grave. The headstone was temporary, a simple metal marker with his name and dates. 23 years, barely long enough to learn how to live, much less how to die with purpose. I had created something in that boy, something powerful and precise and ultimately fragile. The same thing I'd created in hundreds of others. The same thing I'd tried to create in Marcus. The same thing my family had always feared I was becoming myself. The evening shadows stretched long across Arlington's sacred ground, and I finally understood why they were all staring at me with such accusation. Because maybe, For the first time in my 37 years, they were right to be afraid. I wasn't just the Iron Colonel who trained America's elite warriors. I was the woman whose methods might have driven a good soldier to suicide and turned my own nephew into something dangerous. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and investigations and family confrontations that would force me to face a question I'd spent decades avoiding. What happened when the person you'd trained to protect people couldn't protect themselves from what you'd made them become? But tonight, standing alone among Arlington's sacred stones, I had to confront an even harder truth. The boy who'd whispered, "This is your fault," might be absolutely right. The drive back to Kentucky took 8 hours, but my mind traveled 30 years into the past. I wasn't always Colonel Jennifer Davis, the woman who forged elite warriors. Once, I was just Jenny, the 8-year-old girl who learned that being strong could make you unwanted in your own family. It happened on a Tuesday morning in September. Our horse farm sprawled across 200 acres of Kentucky bluegrass, home to thoroughbreds worth more than most people's houses. I was in the north pasture when I heard Thunderbolt's scream. The 3-year-old colt had caught his leg in barbed wire, blood streaming down his coat as he thrashed in panic. Any normal 8-year-old would have run for help. Instead, I approached him with the same calm I'd later use with dying soldiers. When Thunderbolt collapsed from blood loss, I didn't hesitate. I slid my arms under his massive chest and lifted. 300 pounds of injured horse, 8-year-old legs that shouldn't have been able to support that weight. But I carried him 400 yards to the barn, one step at a time. Dr. Morrison, our veterinarian, arrived to find me holding pressure on the wound while Thunderbolt rested his head in my lap. "Jesus Christ, how did you get him in here?" "I carried him." He stared at the blood trail leading from the pasture, the impossible evidence of what I'd accomplished. "Little girl, that horse weighs more than 4 grown men." I shrugged. It hadn't felt impossible. It had felt necessary. But when my parents arrived, I learned that necessary and acceptable were different things entirely. "The neighbors saw you, Jennifer." My father's voice carried that special tone reserved for family embarrassments. "The Weatherbys were driving past. They saw you carrying that horse like some kind of farm hand." My mother's face flushed with shame. "Ladies don't display their strength publicly. What will people think?" I looked down at my bloodied hands. "I saved Thunderbolt." "You acted like a man," my father said. "Neighbors saw you behaving like a man." The word hit me like a physical blow. In my family's world, there was no worse accusation for a daughter. That night, I heard them talking through my bedroom wall. "It's not normal, Marcus. 8-year-old girls shouldn't be that strong. What if she keeps acting like this? The other families already talk." Linda knocked on my door around 9:30 p.m., slipping into my room like a conspirator. At 10, she was everything I wasn't: graceful, gentle, perfectly feminine. "Mama is crying," she whispered. "She thinks you're broken." I stared at the ceiling. "Am I?" Linda considered this seriously. "Maybe you could try being more normal." Normal, the word would follow me for the next decade. The next morning, my parents enrolled me in ballet classes, then piano lessons, then etiquette instruction with Mrs. Pemberton, who taught proper Southern ladies how to be helpless with dignity. For 4 years, they tried to gentle me down. 4 years of forcing my square-peg strength into their round-hole expectations. I learned to curtsy and pour tea and speak softly. I learned to hide my capabilities behind layers of learned helplessness. But I never forgot the feeling of saving Thunderbolt's life. When I turned 12, they threw me a birthday party. Pink decorations, delicate cake, all the neighborhood girls in Sunday dresses celebrating another year of my forced femininity. That's when Billy Hendricks and his older brothers decided to crash the party. They cornered little Amy Patterson by the barn, 3 boys against one 6-year-old girl. They had her dress torn and tears streaming down her face when I found them. "Please don't," Amy whispered. "Please don't hurt me." I looked at those boys, at their cruel grins and grabbing hands, and I felt something snap inside me like a wire under too much tension. What happened next lasted maybe 30 seconds. When it was over, Billy had a broken nose, his brother Tommy was unconscious, and the third boy was running toward the road screaming. Amy was safe in my arms, and I was standing over 3 defeated bullies with my party dress torn and knuckles bloody. The other little girls stared at me with awe and terror. My parents stared at me with horror. "Jennifer Marie Davis," my mother's voice shook with rage and shame. "What have you done?" I looked down at Billy, who was crying and holding his nose, then back at my parents. The same parents who taught me that strength was shameful, that protection was masculine, that normal girls didn't fight back. "I saved Amy," I said simply. But I could see in their faces that I'd done something unforgivable. Not the fighting, not the violence. I'd proven that all their lessons, all their attempts to make me normal, had failed completely. That night, I heard them talking again through the bedroom wall. "She's getting worse, not better. Maybe we need professional help. Maybe there's something wrong with her. The other families are starting to talk about what she might become." I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, and realized something that would shape the rest of my life. My strength wasn't a gift in my family's eyes. It was a curse they were desperate to break. And no matter how many ballet classes or etiquette lessons they forced on me, that curse was only growing stronger. Soon, they'd have to make a choice about what to do with a daughter who refused to be normal. I just didn't know yet how far they'd go to solve their Jennifer problem. That curse my parents feared would manifest itself in ways I never expected. By the time I turned 16, they'd found their solution to the Jennifer problem: make me disappear. It started small. Casual exclusions that could be explained away. "Oh, Jennifer was busy with chores. Jennifer prefers staying home. Jennifer wouldn't enjoy this type of gathering." The lies became so routine that even I started believing them. The Christmas of my junior year taught me that invisible daughters don't get to be part of families, even their own. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. on December 23rd to find my parents loading suitcases into our silver Mercedes. Linda emerged carrying her favorite pillow and jewelry case. "Where are y'all going?" I asked, still in my pajamas. "Disney World. The Pemberton family invited us to spend Christmas at their Orlando house," my mother replied without looking up. "What time do we leave? I haven't packed yet." The silence stretched between us like a frozen pond. "We thought you'd prefer staying home, Jennifer," my father finally said. "You never seem to enjoy family vacations." "I've never been to Disney World," I said quietly. "You're almost 17. Isn't Disney World a bit childish for you?" My mother checked her watch dismissively. I watched them finish packing, watched Linda climb into the back seat, avoiding my eyes, watched my father adjust the rearview mirror to avoid seeing me standing there in Christmas pajamas. "We'll be back on the 28th. There's food in the refrigerator." The Mercedes pulled away at 7:15 a.m., carrying my family toward a Christmas I would never be part of. I stood in the driveway until their taillights disappeared, then walked back into the empty house. 4 days alone. 4 days of Christmas morning without presents or laughter. 4 days to understand that I hadn't just been excluded from a vacation. I'd been excluded from their lives. That first day, I convinced myself it was temporary. Maybe they'd realize their mistake and come back. By Christmas Eve, I understood the truth. This wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. I spent Christmas morning cleaning house, scrubbing floors and polishing silver. Physical work had always quieted the voices in my head. Around 2 p.m., Mrs. Henderson knocked with cookies and a worried expression. "Where's your family, honey? It's Christmas Day. Disney World. They left yesterday." Her face went through several expressions before settling on pity. They left you alone on Christmas. I wanted to stay home. The lie tasted like ash. She didn't believe me, but Southern courtesy prevented prying. You come over if you need anything. After she left, I sat in our empty living room staring at presents under the tree, all labeled for Linda, not a single gift with my name. That's when I found the photo albums, 5 leather-bound albums in my parents' bedroom closet, chronicling our family life from Linda's birth to present. I opened the first expecting to see myself as a loved baby. Instead, I found page after page of Linda. Linda as a newborn, taking first steps, first Christmas, first everything. I appeared in exactly 3 photos, background shots where I couldn't be cropped out without ruining Linda's moment. The pattern continued through all 5 albums: Linda's dance recitals, tea parties, meeting Santa Claus. I was present in maybe 10 photos total, always at the edge, always secondary. The last photo of me was from my 13th birthday party after I'd fought the Hendricks boys. I was standing behind Linda, my dress torn, face tight with anger. Someone had written below, "Jennifer's difficult phase." After that, nothing. 4 years of family memories without a single image of their other daughter. I closed the albums and stared at myself in my bedroom mirror. 17 years old, broad shoulders, short brown hair that refused to curl like Linda's, green eyes that made people uncomfortable. I looked like the kind of daughter who carried injured horses and beat up bullies, the kind who didn't photograph well with their proper Southern family image. My phone buzzed at 8:30 p.m. Text from Linda, "Merry Christmas, Disney World is magical, wish you were here." But she didn't wish I was there. The exclamation points couldn't hide the lie. I made myself a Christmas dinner. Ham from the refrigerator, 2-day-old bread, Thanksgiving mustard. As I ate alone in our empty kitchen, I made a decision that would shape the next 20 years. If my family wanted me invisible, I'd disappear completely. But I wouldn't vanish into their shame. I'd disappear into something bigger, something that valued strength instead of punishing it. I'd already started researching military academies, West Point, the Citadel, places where being strong wasn't a curse, places where invisible daughters could become visible soldiers. The Mercedes returned December 28th, loaded with Disney souvenirs and stories I'd never be part of. They asked if I'd had a nice Christmas, voices carefully neutral. "Perfect," I told them, and for the first time I meant it. That Christmas alone had taught me something they never intended. Being invisible was just another kind of camouflage, and I was about to put it to very good use. The camouflage worked better than I'd hoped. 18 months after that invisible Christmas, I walked into the Army recruiting station in Louisville at exactly 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The same day, Linda was trying on wedding dresses for her engagement to some banker's son. My parents thought I was at my job at Henderson's feed store. They had no idea their problem daughter was about to become someone else's solution. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez looked up from his paperwork with the weary expression of a man who'd seen too many farm kids think the military would solve their problems. "Let me guess. 18 years old, small town, parents don't understand you." Something like that. I placed my high school transcripts on his desk. "I want to be a soldier." He glanced at my grades straight A's except for home economics, where I'd earned a C- for attitude problems, then back at my face. "Why not college? Smart girl like you could do anything. I want to do this." Something in my voice made him sit straighter. Rodriguez had been reading recruits for 15 years. He could smell desperation, rebellion, and genuine calling from across the room. I apparently smelled like the third option. "Basic training ain't summer camp, Miss Davis. We break people down completely before we build them back up." "Good," I said. "I'm ready to be broken down. He studied me for a long moment, then slid the enlistment papers across his desk. Your parents know about this? They will. That night, I waited until after dinner to make my announcement. My father was reading the Louisville Courier-Journal. My mother was planning Linda's engagement party. Linda herself was on the phone with her fiancé, giggling about honeymoon destinations. I enlisted in the Army today. The newspaper rustled to a stop. My mother's pen froze over her guest list. Linda covered her phone and stared at me like I'd announced I was joining the circus. You what? My father's voice was dangerously quiet. I leave for Fort Benning in 6 weeks. No. My mother stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor. Absolutely not. We'll call them tomorrow and cancel this nonsense. I'm 18. You can't cancel anything. The silence that followed felt different from their usual disappointment. This was shock, horror. The realization that their invisible daughter had just made herself visible to the entire United States Army. Jennifer, my father said carefully, women don't belong in combat. I'm not going to combat, I'm going to basic training. Same difference, you'll come back, changed, harder, more masculine than you already are. There it was again, the word that had haunted my childhood, masculine, as if wanting to serve my country was somehow a betrayal of my gender. Linda hung up her phone. Jenny, think about this. What about college? What about finding a husband? What about having a normal life? Normal, the other word that followed me everywhere. I don't want normal, I said. I want purpose. My mother sat back down, her face pale. This is about that Christmas, isn't it? About Disney World, we thought you understood. I understood perfectly. I kept my voice level, controlled. The way I'd learned to do when they made me feel small. You wanted me invisible, mission accomplished. I left them sitting at the dinner table and went upstairs to pack. 6 weeks later, I was on a bus to Georgia with 43 other recruits who'd chosen military service over whatever dead-end futures their small towns offered. The bus pulled into Fort Benning at 2:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Drill Sergeant Martinez was waiting with the kind of smile that promised suffering. Welcome to hell, recruits. The next 16 weeks will determine if you're worthy to call yourselves United States soldiers. As we stumbled off the bus, one of the other female recruits whispered to me, "Oh God, what have we done?" I looked at the imposing barracks, the harsh floodlights, the drill sergeants circling us like predators. For the first time in 18 years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. "We've found home," I whispered back. The next morning, Martinez stood us at attention in the Georgia heat and explained what was about to happen to us. Some of you think you're strong, some of you think you're tough. I'm here to tell you that you're wrong, you are weak, you are soft, you are everything that's wrong with this generation. He stopped in front of me, his face inches from mine. What's your name, recruit? Davis, drill sergeant. You think you're strong, Davis? No, drill sergeant. He smiled and it wasn't pleasant. Good answer, because strong ain't what we're making here. Strong breaks under pressure. You know what doesn't break? What, drill sergeant? Iron. We're gonna forge you into iron, Davis, and iron doesn't bend. Iron doesn't break. Iron endures. As the Georgia sun climbed higher and Martinez began the process of breaking us down, I understood something that my family never would. They'd spent 18 years trying to gentle me into something I wasn't. The Army was about to forge me into everything I was meant to be. And for the first time in my life, I couldn't wait to see what emerged from the fire. Martinez had been right about the iron. By the time I graduated drill instructor school 3 years later, they'd forged something in me that even I didn't fully understand. Something that could break recruits down to their psychological bones and rebuild them into weapons. The Army called it a gift. I was starting to wonder if it was a curse. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, home of the 82nd Airborne and the most elite soldiers America could produce. I walked into my first assignment as a Special Forces instructor at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning, carrying a reputation that had followed me from every base I'd served. Iron Davis breaks people who can't be broken. My new commanding officer, Colonel Matthews, didn't waste time with pleasantries. Davis, I'm assigning you to selection. The washout rate for Special Forces candidates is 60%. Your job is to make it higher. Sir, we need soldiers who won't break under any circumstances. Torture, isolation, psychological warfare, they have to be unbreakable. Your methods produce results, but there's been talk. I kept my face neutral. What kind of talk, sir? Matthews pulled a file from his desk. Tommy Chen's name was written across the tab in neat military script. 3 training accidents in the past year. All soldiers who graduated your programs, all suffering from what the doctors are calling delayed stress reactions. My chest tightened. Accidents, sir. Suicide attempts, 1 successful. He leaned back in his chair. The question, Davis, is whether you're creating elite soldiers or walking time bombs. That night I sat in my quarters reviewing Tommy Chen's file. Graduated my program 6 months ago with honors. Psychological evaluation, stable. Mission readiness, exceptional. Combat effectiveness, elite. Then, 3 weeks into his first deployment, he tried to hang himself in a supply closet. The report listed mission stress as the cause, but I knew better. I'd seen that look in Tommy's eyes during his final training exercise. The same look I'd seen in my bathroom mirror as a child when my parents called me a monster. The look of someone who'd been broken so completely that they weren't sure which pieces were still themselves. My phone rang at 11:30 p.m. Unknown number. Colonel Davis. The voice was young, shaky, one of my graduates from last year's class. This is Davis. Ma'am, this is Sergeant Collins from Bravo Company. I need help. Collins, I remembered him. Farm kid from Iowa, joined the Army to escape an abusive father. I'd used his childhood trauma during psychological conditioning, pushed him past his breaking point to forge him into something harder. What's wrong, Collins? I can't sleep. I can't eat. Every time I close my eyes, I see. I hear your voice. The things you made me remember. The things you made me feel. My mouth went dry. Collins, where are you? Base housing. I've got my service weapon. I keep thinking. Maybe it would be easier. I was out the door before he finished the sentence. I found Collins sitting on his kitchen floor at 12:45 a.m., his .45 caliber pistol on the table beside him. His face was hollow, eyes vacant. The same expression Tommy had worn in his final photo. Collins, look at me. He raised his head slowly. You made me strong, Colonel, just like you promised, but I don't know who I am anymore. You took everything that made me, and replaced it with something else. I knelt beside him, my heart pounding. You're a soldier, you protect people, you save lives. Whose life? His voice cracked. I can't even save myself. I stayed with Collins until 4 a.m., talking him through the crisis, getting him connected with base mental health services. But as I drove home through the pre-dawn darkness, his words echoed in my mind. You took everything that made me. The next morning, I stood before my new class of Special Forces candidates, 43 of America's finest, eager to be transformed into elite warriors. They looked at me with the same trust Tommy had shown, the same faith Collins had placed in my methods. Gentlemen, I began. The next 16 weeks will determine if you have what it takes to join America's most elite fighting force. But as I looked into their faces, I saw something that terrified me. They weren't just trusting me to make them stronger. They were trusting me not to destroy them in the process. And for the first time in my career, I wasn't sure I deserved that trust. Matthews had been right to question my methods. The line between forging iron and shattering souls was thinner than I'd ever imagined. The question was, had I already crossed it? And if I had, how many more Tommy Chens would it take before someone stopped me? The answer to my question came sooner than I expected. delivered through a phone call that would force me to confront everything I'd spent 15 years running from. It was 2:17 a.m. on a Thursday in March when my phone rang. I was reviewing psychological profiles of my next Special Forces class, trying to identify which recruits might break under my methods before they entered the program. The caller ID showed a Kentucky number I hadn't seen in over a decade. Jennifer. My mother's voice was barely a whisper, cracked with desperation. What's wrong? I kept my voice level professional, the same tone I used with broken soldiers in crisis. It's Linda, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. They're giving her 6 months. I set down the psychological profiles and walked to my window. Fort Bragg stretched out under the North Carolina moonlight, peaceful and orderly, nothing like the chaos suddenly erupting in my chest. I'm sorry to hear that. Jennifer, please. My mother's voice broke completely. She needs you, we need you. The word we hung between us like a bridge neither of us had expected to cross. For 15 years there had been no we. What about Marcus? Linda's son, my nephew, the boy I'd helped raise during rare family visits before the exclusions began. He's 14 now, angry, getting into fights at school. Linda can't control him, and with the treatment starting. Another sob. He needs structure, discipline, the kind you know how to provide. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same family that had rejected my strength was now begging for it. Why me? Why now? Because we were wrong. The words came out like broken glass. We were wrong about you, Jennifer. We were scared of what you might become, but we should have been proud. 15 years too late, but there it was, the acknowledgement I'd stopped hoping for. What exactly are you asking me to do? Come home, help us, and Marcus. He's turning into something we don't recognize, something angry and violent. Violent. The word that had defined my childhood, now describing my nephew, the cycle continuing. He got suspended last week for putting another boy in the hospital. The school says he needs professional help. I thought about Collins sitting on his kitchen floor. About Tommy Chen's final photo. About the 43 psychological profiles on my desk, each one a young man trusting me not to break him while I made him stronger. I have a career here, responsibilities. I know, but Jennifer, you're our last hope. Marcus listens to you, he always has. I remembered the last time I'd seen Marcus. He was 8, all hero worship and endless questions about the army. What do the other kids say about you at school? He'd asked during a brief Christmas visit. They say I'm different. Different how? Different scary, different bad. He'd considered this seriously. Aunt Jenny, I think different can be good too. That conversation had been 6 years ago, before whatever had turned my curious nephew into someone who put other children in the hospital. I'll need to request emergency leave, I said finally. It might take a few days to arrange. Does that mean? It means I'll come home. The word felt strange on my tongue. Kentucky hadn't been home since I was 18. Thank you. My mother's relief was palpable. Linda specifically asked for you. She said you were the strongest person she knew. Strongest person she knew. Coming from the sister who'd watched me get excluded from everything, it meant something. I'll drive up this weekend. After I hung up, I sat in my quarters until dawn, staring at those psychological profiles. 43 young men who wanted to become elite soldiers, who trusted me to forge them into something better than they were. But what if I was wrong? What if my methods didn't create elite warriors? What if they created broken souls like Tommy Chen? Maybe it was time to find out if the woman who could break soldiers could also heal a broken family. Maybe it was time to discover if the Iron Colonel could be something more than just a weapon. The phone rang again at 6:30 a.m. Colonel Matthews. Davis, I need to talk to you about the Chen investigation. Some new information has come to light. Sir, I actually need to request emergency family leave. Family leave? Davis, you don't have family. For 15 years that had been true. But sometimes the people who reject you are the same ones who need you most. I do now, sir, and they need me. The question was, did they need Jennifer Davis the colonel or Jenny the girl who'd once carried a wounded horse to safety? I had a feeling I was about to find out which one of us was stronger. The answer turned out to be more complicated than I'd imagined. 3 days later, I was standing in the kitchen of my childhood home, crushing pills into applesauce for a sister who could barely keep liquids down, while the same parents who'd once excluded me for being too strong now depended on that strength to keep their dying daughter alive. The irony wasn't lost on me. 20 years of systematic exclusion, and now I was the only one capable of handling Linda's medical needs. The morphine needs to be given every 4 hours. Dr. Patterson had explained during our 11 a.m. meeting. She'll need help with basic functions. It's going to require someone with physical capability. Physical capability, the polite medical term for what my family had always called unnatural strength. Linda lay propped against pillows in what used to be our parents' master bedroom, her once golden hair now thin and brittle from chemotherapy. At 35, she looked 20 years older. "I'm sorry, Jenny." Her voice was barely a whisper. "For everything, for Christmas, for the photos, for letting them make you invisible." I adjusted her Roman 4 drip, checking the flow rate with military precision. "Save your strength." "No, I need you to know. It wasn't because we didn't love you. It was because we were scared." Scared of what? Of how strong you were. Of what that might mean. Of how it made the rest of us look weak. I looked down at my sister, this fragile woman who'd once been everything I wasn't: delicate, feminine, acceptable. Now she was trusting me with her life because of the exact qualities that had made me unacceptable. "Where's Marcus?" "School. He'll be home around 3:30 p.m. Jenny, he's different now. Angry. The school counselor says he has authority issues." Authority issues. I'd seen that diagnosis before, usually attached to recruits from broken homes with no structure. "What kind of fights?" "Last month he put a senior in the hospital. The boy was picking on a freshman and Marcus just snapped, broke his nose, cracked 3 ribs. My chest tightened. The same protective instinct that had driven me to fight the Hendricks boys now manifesting in the next generation. "Has anyone tried to teach him control, discipline?" Linda's laugh was bitter. "Mama and Daddy tried military school applications. I said no. After what we did to you, I was afraid we'd lose him the same way." The same way. As if my joining the army had been a loss instead of an escape. My phone buzzed at 2:45 p.m. Unknown number. "Colonel Davis, this is Principal Morrison from Jefferson High School. We need you to come pick up Marcus immediately." "What happened?" "There's been an incident. Marcus is suspended pending investigation." I looked at Linda, sleeping fitfully after her afternoon medication. My parents were at their bridge club, maintaining social obligations while their daughter died. "I'll be right there." I found Marcus sitting in the principal's office, his knuckles split and bloody, his 14-year-old face set in an expression I recognized from my own mirror at that age. Rage with nowhere to go. "What did you do?" I asked quietly. He looked up, and for a moment I saw the 8-year-old boy who'd thought different could be good. Then his face hardened again. "Same thing you would have done, Aunt Iron." Principal Morrison cleared his throat. "Marcus attacked 3 juniors who were harassing a special needs student. While we appreciate his protective instincts, his methods were excessive." I looked at Marcus, sitting there with blood on his knuckles and defiance in his eyes, and saw myself at 14. The same protective rage, the same inability to walk away from injustice. How badly hurt are the other boys? 2 required medical attention. The 3rd ran when Marcus turned on him. Marcus had taken on 3 older boys to protect someone weaker. It was exactly what I would have done at his age. Exactly what had made my family ashamed of me. But unlike me, Marcus didn't have anyone teaching him how to channel that protective instinct into something useful. Until now. "Come on," I said, standing. "We need to talk." As we walked toward the parking lot, Marcus finally spoke. "Are you going to tell me I was wrong, like everyone else?" I stopped walking and looked at him. 14 years old, suspended from school, facing possible criminal charges for doing what he thought was right. "No," I said. "I'm going to teach you how to do it better." The boy who'd been failed by every adult in his life looked at me with something I hadn't seen since I was his age. Hope. And for the first time since Tommy Chen's funeral, I wondered if my methods might actually save someone instead of breaking them. That hope in Marcus's eyes turned out to be both a gift and a responsibility heavier than any I'd carried in the army. Over the next 3 months, as Linda's condition worsened and my parents retreated further into denial, I found myself facing the most challenging training mission of my career, reshaping a 14-year-old boy without breaking his spirit. The work began at 5:30 a.m. every morning in our backyard, away from neighbors' eyes and family judgment. Physical training isn't about becoming stronger, I explained to Marcus on his first morning, watching him struggle through basic push-ups. It's about learning control, every movement deliberate, every response measured. He collapsed after 15 push-ups, breathing hard. "This is stupid. I can already beat up 3 guys at once." "That's the problem. You're reacting, not responding. Reaction is chaos. Response is choice." Marcus rolled his eyes, but he kept showing up every morning, kept pushing through the exercises I'd adapted from Special Forces conditioning, kept asking questions that reminded me why I'd become an instructor in the first place. "Why do you make me count out loud during planks?" "Because when you're in pain, when everything hurts, your voice is the first thing that breaks. If you can control your voice, you can control everything else." By the end of the first month, Marcus had stopped getting into fights at school, not because he'd become passive, but because he'd learned to recognize the difference between protection and aggression. But the real test came on a Thursday evening in July. I was helping Linda with her 8 p.m. medication when Marcus burst through the front door, his face flushed with excitement and something darker. "Aunt Jenny, I need to tell you something." Linda squeezed my hand weakly. "Go, I'm fine." I found Marcus pacing the kitchen like a caged animal, the same energy I'd seen in recruits after their first successful mission. "There's this guy, Derek Munson, Sr. He's been dealing drugs to middle school kids behind the gymnasium." My chest tightened. "How do you know this?" "I saw him today after practice. He had this 7th grader, Tommy Watson, cornered. Kid was scared, crying, saying he didn't have the money. Derek was getting physical." "What did you do?" Marcus looked down at his hands. "Nothing. I remembered what you taught me about assessing situations before acting, so I watched. I took pictures with my phone. I got evidence." Relief and pride warred in my chest. 3 months ago, Marcus would have charged in swinging. Now he was thinking tactically. "Good, what's the next step?" "That's what I need to ask you about." His voice dropped. "Derek saw me taking pictures. He followed me after school, said if I told anyone, he'd hurt Tommy and his little sister, said he knew where they lived." The familiar rage started building in my chest. A drug dealer threatening children, threatening my nephew. The same protective instinct that had driven me to carry wounded horses and beat up bullies and forge elite soldiers from broken recruits. But this wasn't my fight. This was Marcus's test. "What do you think you should do?" "The right thing is to tell the police, get Derek arrested, protect Tommy and the other kids." But Derek's older, bigger, and he's got friends. If the police don't act fast enough, people could get hurt." I studied my nephew's face. 14 years old, wrestling with the same moral complexity that kept me awake at night after training sessions. The burden of being strong enough to act, but smart enough to know that action had consequences. "What did I teach you about the difference between a warrior and a weapon?" Marcus straightened, reciting the lesson I drilled into him. "A weapon destroys. A warrior protects. A weapon acts alone. A warrior builds alliances. So, a slow smile spread across his face. So I don't handle this alone. I talk to Coach Patterson. He's former military, right? And I talk to Tommy's parents. And I make sure Derek knows that hurting kids isn't just illegal, it's going to make a lot of very protective adults very angry. And if Derek still doesn't back down, Marcus's smile turned harder, older. Then I stop him, but not alone, not stupid, not out of anger. He met my eyes, with purpose. That night, as I sat beside Linda's bed listening to her labored breathing, I realized something that both terrified and amazed me. I hadn't broken Marcus with my training. I'd given him the tools to become something I'd never managed to be at his age, strong enough to fight, but wise enough to know when not to. But watching him wrestle with moral complexity reminded me of Collins on his kitchen floor, of Tommy Chen writing goodbye letters, of the fine line between forging steel and shattering souls. Marcus was thriving under my guidance. But what happened when I wasn't there to guide him? What happened when the boy I'd trained to be unbreakable faced something that required breaking? The answer would come sooner than either of us expected, and it would force me to confront the hardest question of all. Had I created a protector, or had I simply made a more sophisticated version of myself? The answer came at 4:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October, when Linda's labored breathing finally stopped, and I understood that some battles can't be won with strength alone. I was dozing in the chair beside her bed when the change in rhythm woke me. The rasp that had filled our nights for weeks had gone silent. I reached for her wrist, checking for a pulse I already knew wasn't there. "I'm sorry I wasn't stronger," I whispered to her still form. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." But even as I said the words, I knew Linda hadn't needed saving. She'd needed something I'd never learned how to give until these past 6 months. Not the strength to fight, but the strength to let go. My parents took the news with careful control. Arrangements were made. Calls were placed. The machinery of Southern funeral etiquette began its familiar rotation. Marcus took it differently. I found him at 7:30 a.m. in the backyard, attacking the heavy bag I'd hung from the old oak tree with bloody knuckles and tears he was trying to punch away. "She's gone," he said without stopping his assault. "All your training, all your lessons about being strong, and I couldn't save my own mother." I caught the bag on his next swing. "Strength isn't about preventing death, Marcus. It's about how we live while we're here." "That's bullshit." His voice cracked. "What's the point of being strong if you can't protect the people you love?" The question hit me like a physical blow because I'd been asking myself the same thing for 6 months. "I don't know," I admitted. "But your mother taught me something these past months. Sometimes strength means holding their hand while they die instead of forcing them to keep fighting." Marcus wiped his nose on his sleeve. "She made me promise something. Before she got too sick to talk, she made me promise to tell you a secret." My chest tightened. "What secret?" "The basement thing, when she was delirious talking about locking you in the basement that Christmas. It wasn't just one Christmas, Aunt Jenny, and it wasn't just the basement." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "What are you talking about?" "Mom kept a journal. She hid it in her closet. She wanted you to read it after she was gone." An hour later, I sat in Linda's bedroom holding a leather-bound diary that explained everything I'd never understood about my childhood. The entries started when Linda was 12, written in careful handwriting. December 23rd, 1995, they locked Jenny in the basement again today. Told everyone she went to Disney World with us, but she's been down there for 3 days. I brought her food twice, but Daddy said if I told anyone, they'd send me away too. March 3rd, 1996, they took Jenny to the hospital in Louisville. Told me it was for tests, but I heard them talking about treatments that would make her more normal. Jenny came back different, quieter. She stopped protecting me from things. My hands shook as I turned the pages. Entry after entry documenting a systematic campaign to break the spirit of a child whose only crime was being born strong. Medical interventions, psychological conditioning, isolation therapy designed to make me doubt my own perceptions. The final entry was dated 6 months ago. April 12th, 2024, I'm dying, and the only person strong enough to take care of me is the sister we tried so hard to break. Jenny crushes my pills with gentle precision. We took everything from her, and she still came home to save me. I don't deserve her forgiveness, but I'm going to die trying to earn it. I closed the journal and sat in the silence of my sister's empty room. Everything made sense now. The exclusions, the invisible Christmases, the systematic erasure from family photos. It had been a deliberate campaign to convince a strong girl that her strength was dangerous. But they'd made one crucial mistake. Instead of breaking me, they'd driven me toward the one place where strength was valued instead of feared. Marcus knocked on the door at 2:15 p.m. "Aunt Jenny, the funeral director's here. Grandpa says you need to come talk about arrangements." I stood, tucking Linda's journal against my chest like armor. "Marcus, that secret your mother wanted you to tell me, how much do you know?" "Enough." His voice was steady, older. "Enough to understand why you left, and enough to understand why you came back. And what do you understand? That they were afraid of you because you were everything they couldn't control, and that you came back anyway because that's what strong people do. They protect the people who hurt them." I looked at my nephew, 14 years old, mourning his mother, carrying secrets that should have broken him, and saw something that filled me with both pride and terror. He understood, not just my training methods, but the deeper truth about strength and family, and the terrible responsibility of being the person others depend on when everything falls apart. But understanding and surviving were different things. And I was about to find out which one Marcus was truly prepared for. That test of Marcus's understanding came sooner and more violently than either of us expected. 6 weeks after Linda's funeral, at 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night, I got the phone call that would determine whether everything I'd taught him had created a protector or a weapon. "Colonel Davis, this is Detective Morrison with Metro Police. We have your nephew in custody. You need to get down here immediately." I was at Linda's grave, a ritual I'd started after the funeral. Sitting beside her headstone in the dark, reading entries from her journal and trying to understand how my parents had convinced themselves that breaking a child was an act of love. What happened? Multiple assault charges, 3 victims in the hospital, 1 in critical condition. His voice was carefully neutral. "Marcus isn't talking, just keeps asking for you." The drive to the police station took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Marcus sat in an interview room, his clothes torn and bloodied, his knuckles split open. But it was his eyes that terrified me. Empty, distant. The same expression I'd seen on soldiers who'd gone too far and couldn't find their way back. "What did you do?" I asked quietly. He looked up, and for a moment I saw the 14-year-old boy who'd held his dying mother's hand. Then the mask slipped back into place. "I did what you taught me. I protected someone who couldn't protect themselves." Detective Morrison slid a file across the table. 3 photos of teenage boys, all beaten badly enough to require hospitalization. The 3rd photo made my stomach clench. A boy who couldn't have been more than 15, his face so swollen I couldn't make out his features. Marcus found these 3 assaulting a girl behind the Circle K on Bardstown Road. Witnesses say he told them to stop. When they didn't, Morrison shrugged. "Your nephew has some very effective training." "Tell me exactly what happened," I said to Marcus. His voice was flat, emotionless. "I was walking home from the library, heard someone screaming, found them holding her down, tearing her clothes. I gave them one warning, they laughed. And then I removed the threat. The clinical language chilled me. It was exactly how I'd taught him to describe necessary violence. Quickly, efficiently, completely. Detective Morrison leaned forward. The girl confirms Marcus's story, says he saved her life, but the level of violence... He pulled out another photo. This isn't self-defense, Colonel. This is systematic destruction. I stared at the images of broken boys and saw my methods reflected back at me. Every technique I'd taught Marcus about pressure points and leverage, and how to disable multiple opponents simultaneously. Every lesson about controlled aggression and targeted violence. All of it turned against 3 teenagers who'd made the mistake of threatening someone under Marcus's protection. The girl, I asked. Sarah Patterson, 15, she'll recover physically, but... Morrison's voice softened. Marcus didn't just stop an assault, he prevented a rape, possibly saved her life. My hands shook as I closed the file. What are the charges? Aggravated assault on all 3 counts. The DA wants to try him as an adult, 25 years minimum if convicted. I looked at Marcus, sitting there with blood on his hands and emptiness in his eyes, and realized I was staring at every parent's worst nightmare. Not that their child would be hurt, but that their child would become someone capable of hurting others. I want to talk to my nephew alone. After Morrison left, I sat across from Marcus in the sterile interview room and asked the question that had been haunting me since Tommy Chen's funeral. Do you regret it? He met my eyes for the first time since I'd arrived. Regret stopping them? No. Regret how far I went. He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, when I saw what they were doing to her. Something just broke inside me, like a dam bursting. All that control you taught me, all that discipline, just gone. Marcus listened to me very carefully. What you did tonight protecting Sarah, that was right. How you did it. I gestured toward the photos. That's the part we need to figure out. Did I go too far? His voice cracked. Did I become the thing everyone's always been afraid I'd become? The question hung between us like smoke, because I didn't know the answer. I'd spent months teaching him to be strong, to be controlled, to protect people. But I'd never taught him how to stop once the threat was neutralized. I'd never taught him the difference between sufficient force and total destruction, because I'd never learned that difference myself. I don't know, I admitted, but we're going to figure it out together. As the Louisville police processed paperwork and prepared to transfer Marcus to juvenile detention, I sat in that interview room and faced the hardest truth of my career. I'd succeeded in creating exactly what I'd always created, a perfect weapon. The question was whether there was still enough of the boy left inside to forge him into something more. The answer to whether Marcus was a protector or weapon came from the most unexpected source. The men I'd once feared I'd broken beyond repair. At 9:30 a.m. on Monday morning, as I sat in the courthouse waiting for Marcus's bail hearing, I heard the unmistakable sound of military boots marching in formation outside. Through the tall windows, I watched in disbelief as 200 men in dress uniforms filed through the courthouse doors. Special forces, Rangers, Delta Force operators, every branch represented by soldiers whose faces I recognized from graduation ceremonies dating back 15 years. Sergeant Collins was among them, the same man who'd sat on his kitchen floor with a service weapon, questioning everything I'd taught him. Now he wore Master Sergeant stripes and carried himself with quiet confidence. Colonel Davis, he saluted with crisp precision. We're here to testify for Marcus. Collins, this is a civilian matter. No, ma'am, this is about what you taught us, about the difference between being a weapon and being a warrior. That boy is one of us now. Collins pulled out his phone, showing me viral security footage from the Circle K. This version included audio the police files hadn't contained. Stop! Leave her alone. This is your only warning. When the boys laughed and continued their assault, Marcus moved with precision I'd taught him, but the video showed something the photos hadn't captured the moment Marcus realized the third boy was unconscious. How he immediately stopped, checked pulse, positioned him in recovery position. The clinical efficiency of someone trained to preserve life, not just take it. He didn't lose control, Collins explained. He applied exactly the right amount of force, then switched to medical protocols when the situation changed. That's not a weapon, Colonel. That's a warrior making tactical decisions to save lives. Collins handed me a thick folder marked Classified Special Operations Command. Mission reports, Colonel. Every successful operation conducted by your graduates over the past 5 years. We've documented over 200 lives saved directly because of your training methods. My hands shook as I opened the folder. Page after page of after-action reports detailing missions where my former students had used precisely the kind of controlled violence Marcus had employed. Tommy Chen, I whispered. Is here too, Collins said quietly. I looked up, confused. Tommy's dead. No, ma'am, Tommy survived. He's been in therapy for 6 months, learning to reconcile the warrior you made him with the human being he still was underneath. Tommy Chen stepped forward from the crowd, thinner, with new scars on his wrists, but alive, standing at attention with the same precision I'd drilled into him. Colonel Davis, the night I tried to kill myself wasn't because your training broke me. It was because I thought I'd failed your training. I thought warriors weren't supposed to feel pain. You taught me to be strong, but never taught me that strong people still need help sometimes. He gestured toward Marcus being led into the courtroom in handcuffs. That boy did exactly what any of us would have done. He saw innocents under attack and neutralized the threat with minimal necessary force. The difference is he knew when to stop. He knew how to preserve life after taking control. That's not a breakdown, Colonel. That's evolution. As the bail hearing began, I watched 200 of America's elite warriors stand as character witnesses for a 14-year-old boy who'd learned their lessons well enough to save a girl's life without losing his soul. For the first time since Tommy's funeral, I understood something that had eluded me for 20 years. I hadn't been creating broken soldiers. I'd been forging weapons who learned to become warriors through the crucible of their own humanity. And Marcus wasn't my failure. He was my finest success. The question now was whether 12 civilian jurors would understand the difference between a monster and a guardian, and whether the system that had failed to protect Sarah Patterson would recognize the boy who hadn't failed her when it mattered most. The system did recognize the difference, though it took 3 months of legal battles before Marcus walked free at 2:15 p.m. on a cold February afternoon. Judge Harrison's final words still echoed in my mind. This court finds that Marcus Davis acted with extraordinary courage and precisely calibrated force to prevent a violent felony. His actions represent the highest ideals of protection and service. Marcus was cleared of all charges. Sarah Patterson had testified via video link, calling him her guardian angel. The 3 boys he'd stopped were facing federal charges for attempted sexual assault. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in what happened next. 6 months later, I stood in the converted barn behind my Kentucky family home, watching the first graduating class of the Iron Heart Academy. 15 young people, aged 14 to 17, each one carrying the kind of strength that traditional society feared and misunderstood. They weren't all physically powerful like Marcus and me. Some had intellectual gifts that intimidated adults. Others possessed emotional resilience that made their families uncomfortable. All had been labeled problems by someone who couldn't understand that different didn't mean dangerous. Strength without purpose is destruction, Marcus recited as he led the graduation ceremony. At 15, he'd become my first assistant instructor, helping other misunderstood kids learn what he discovered through pain and trial. Strength with purpose becomes protection. The parents in the audience, the ones who'd stayed, who'd chosen to understand rather than fear their exceptional children, wiped away tears as their sons and daughters received certificates not for conformity, but for learning to channel their gifts toward protecting others. My own parents sat in the front row, still struggling to comprehend the woman their attempts to break had become. The medical records Linda's journal had referenced were now public knowledge, part of reforms to how difficult children were treated in our state. "We were trying to help you," my mother had said during one painful conversation. "The doctors said your strength was abnormal." "It did hurt someone," I'd replied. "It hurt me, but it also saved lives. Sometimes, what looks broken is exactly what the world needs." The ceremony ended with our academy pledge, words I'd written after Tommy Chen taught me that strength and vulnerability weren't opposites. "I am strong, but I am not alone. I protect others, but I also accept protection. My strength serves love, not fear." As families gathered for celebration, Collins approached me with a familiar folder. "Another classified update, Colonel. Your methods are being studied by military psychologists worldwide. They're calling it the Davis Doctrine psychological conditioning that creates warriors who retain their humanity." I looked around at my students, laughing and celebrating with families who'd learned to embrace their children's gifts. At Marcus, teaching a younger student the difference between controlled and uncontrolled force. At Tommy Chen, who'd driven down from Fort Campbell to speak about asking for help when strength felt like a burden. "It's not the Davis Doctrine," I said. "It's just what happens when you stop trying to break people and start helping them build themselves." That evening, as the last families departed, Marcus found me in the office that used to be Linda's bedroom. "Aunt Jennifer, do you ever regret it? Coming home? Giving up your military career for all this family stuff?" I looked at the wall where Linda's final journal entry was framed beside photos of our first graduating class, beside a letter from Sarah Patterson's parents thanking me for teaching Marcus how to save their daughter. "Marcus, I spent 20 years teaching soldiers how to be unbreakable, but the strongest thing I ever did was come home and learn how to be vulnerable, how to care for someone who was dying, how to forgive family who'd hurt me. So no regrets." I smiled, thinking of Tommy Chen's words about strength and asking for help, about 15 young people who'd learned that being different was a gift, not a curse. None at all. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign soil. Sometimes they're fought in your own backyard, teaching the next generation that their strength has purpose. As I locked up the academy, I realized something that would have amazed the 18-year-old girl who'd enlisted to escape her family's shame. I'd finally become everything I was meant to be, not just the Iron Colonel who forged elite warriors, but the woman who'd learned that true strength meant building bridges instead of walls. And every life touched by our academy proved that sometimes what the world calls broken is exactly what it needs to heal. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt too strong, too different, too much for the people around you, share it with others who might need to hear it. Your strength has purpose, even when others can't see it. Stay strong and keep building bridges.